Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reclamation Podcast, where our goal is to help you reclaim good practices for faith and life. Today is episode 112 of the podcast, and I get to sit down with leader, content curator, podcaster, and Christian super connector, Brad Lomenick. I've been following Brad's career for a long time, since he was in charge of Catalyst many moons ago. Brad and I talk about curation of content, we talk about leadership, we talk about the next generation of leaders. This was such a life-giving conversation for me. I really enjoyed the connection. And if you enjoyed this conversation, do me a favor, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. And also, leave us a rating or review on iTunes. We're trying to get to 100 reviews by the end of the year, and we need your help. Reviews on iTunes are kind of like search parameters. They help people find the podcast and hear about what God is doing through this platform. I'm so thankful for each and every one of you who take the time to listen, and I'm really thankful to be a part of the Spirit and Truth Podcast Network. This podcast network is all about connecting like-minded individuals in new ways. For more information on Spirit and Truth, check them out, spiritandtruth.life. Now, without any further ado, here's my conversation with Brad Lomenick. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited today to have one of the kind of a lifelong mentor in my life, in my ministry life, at least. I hope that didn't make you feel old. Brad Lomenick. Brad, how are you, my friend?
It does make me feel old. Mentors usually have age assigned to them.
Well, now, in all fairness, when I started in ministry, I was a little older, and when you started in ministry, you were a little younger. So
there you go. The
gap is not as big as it sounds.
Yeah. Thank you.
And one of the things that you do better than most is this idea about curation, right? And about gathering both people and content. And so I really want to talk about that for our listeners, because I think there's a lot of people out there who are struggling to figure out what they should be listening to and how they should be listening. So let me start there. How did you kind of get on the path of putting together information and people for the sake of growth?
Well, I think I've been doing it for a long time. I mean, I think it's part of just wiring for me. In terms of when I think curating and curation, even the idea that, in your elementary days or in my elementary days, I was curating friends on the playground. I mean, I was figuring out like who needs to play on that team and who needs to play on this team and who should sit together in the cafeteria. And that was just a natural, I think it's part of natural leadership that you start to be a filter, but you're not filtering for what's best for you. You're filtering for what's best for others. Now, the reason I'm doing it today is because there's so much noise.
Yeah.
And the more noise there is, the more information that's just ubiquitous and it's readily available. And I don't care what information that is. I mean, it can be like mindless, dumb stuff, but it's also like, think of all the voices that we have access to now that can truly mentor us or, mentor us from a distance on YouTube and podcast. And all these voices that were like, oh my gosh, those are heroes of mine. And now, we just have thousands and thousands and thousands of choices. So I think in the midst of noise and almost paralysis by too many options, we need these curators who are friends, they're third-party friends who say to us, listen, I've gone through and I've come up with this list of 10. And I just think that's really valuable for people today. And it's true in terms of what I do on my podcast, for example, but also it's true in terms of that so much of the event world that I now am involved in, Tony, like I'm trying to curate and create invite-only environments, not because I want to be exclusive, but because my friends are saying, hey, I trust you to get me together with 15 other people that I may not know, but that I should know. And when I do that, I'm actually like adding value, but I'm creating influence, and I'm connecting two people that then they go off and they change the world. So it's still like, for me, I mean, to to not be cheesy, but the idea of a catalyst
Hmm.
is that you're a change agent that creates a spark that leaves no residue of itself. That's what a catalyst is. Like, it's something that creates change, but it's not about them or not about that. And so it's just another season for me of influence beyond sort of where I've been in the past. And, I think it's most needed right now. And the expert on the experts, that's another way that I would describe it. Like, I try to be the expert on who the experts are. I don't have to be the expert.
Yeah.
I just need to be the expert on who the experts are.
So let me ask you this, because I think a lot of people resonate with, they're trying to figure out which voices to listen to, and they're trying to find those trusted advisors. How do you know who the right person to curate in versus leave out is?
It's a good question. I don't always know.
Sure.
So I got to do the homework. I got to be a student of people. I've got to, I think so much of the time, what it comes back to is that as you start to build your trusted circle, then people will start to actually protect that trusted circle by only curating or inviting in those who should be part of it. Right. So the power of something like TED, just as one example, is that there's almost this sense of everybody who's been to TED now protects TED from becoming something TED doesn't want to become. Compared to just the opposite, which is, some things they end up like they lose their identity because you've had so many people who've shown up now that don't feel the weight of stewardship of let's keep this only among the people that we want to make sure it's connected to. So to answer your question, I think the best way I do that is by doing my homework, being intentional, being curious, but also that there are people that now that I would say kind of are in my slipstream, that they trust me and I trust them to the point where if they say, hey, Brad, we should invite so-and-so, then I look at that and go, done. Because I just know that they're protecting the thing that now we're both trying to build, right? And that's, I think that's what a true tribe is, that Seth Godin talks about, like this idea that people like us do things like this, and when you see movements, that was the thing with Catalyst. I think that for all those years, one of the real powers of Catalyst having more influence was that there was a sense of ownership among the people who attended. And it was like, really? Like, you feel like you're part of this thing? And they're like, yeah. And so much of it was sort of the intangibles, I think, of that there was just a spirit of we want this thing to be so great that we're going to, it's not like we're going to not tell people about it, but we almost don't want to tell people about it, right?
Well, I can remember telling my lead pastor at the time, I was like, well, this is really just for young leaders.
Exactly.
Because I was always really good at tact. But,
right. Well, there was that sense of like, I'm not even sure I want that other leader to come.
Yeah.
Not because I don't love them, but I sort of want it to myself, or, I only want to, there's like this sense of identity that comes from it. And you start to see people that look like that. And we have to be careful that it's not exclusivity. It's not arrogance. It's not all those things, but there's a deep-seated hunger in all of us. And, for every pastor listening, I think the three greatest felt needs for people today in just the world and culture is who am I? Why am I here? And who do I belong to?
Yeah.
Like the identity question, the purpose question, and then the community question. And that community question, who do I belong to, is really about the, who now are you doing life with? Who do you feel like you connect most to? This is why, like, whoever your sneaker brand is, whoever you go to for your fashion outlet, so much of it is not about the fashion. It's not about what you're wearing. It's about how it makes you feel, right? It's about, people like us we wear Air Jordans, right? And that, because it's pretty much all the same leather.
Sure. Yeah. Or Tom's or, Sperry's or whatever. Right. Like, yeah, that makes sense. It's become part of our identity, and it's become kind of a calling card.
There's a deeper emotional connection so many times that, even going back to the question of, how do you think about the curation side? How do you actually build connection points with a circle of people? Well, there's all of a sudden these words you use, and there's things you wear, and there's things you say, and there's the approach that you have, and it's all the stuff that now starts to like make up this tangible ingredient that people, when they see it, they're like, oh, I connect to that.
Well, one of the things that I have noticed just kind of watching you from a distance is that you're really good about bringing people in for experiences. And that feels like it's a part of your connection. I'm curious, what's your assessment on the health of leaders hopefully coming out of COVID? I guess, we can say that safely now. I mean, how do you feel like the leaders that are in your circle, the leaders you've curated, how are they doing at leading?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there is I think the jury's still out, one, because obviously when you start looking at the lag measure of 14 or 15 months of a pandemic, it's the wild, wild west still. Like we're still like trying to figure out how do we actually lead in that, not even to the point of what are the measurable results of that. So there's still a lot of things to be figured out, to be analyzed. The data's not in yet. But I do know this. One, a lot of leaders who I would say have done well, or at least they feel like they've gotten through this. The reason so many of them did is because adaptability, change, the ability to pivot, all those things were already in play for them. They weren't necessarily trying to like work out a new muscle. Yeah, it was already there. And it's that idea that crisis creates opportunity. Some leaders they thrive in crisis. Mm-hmm. So the ones who I think have stepped out of this last season and they look around and go, man, I feel like I crushed it, are the ones probably who embrace change naturally. And there's a lot of those. Like, I think a lot of leaders actually who are pioneer spirits. Yeah. So many of us, we almost feel guilty with looking back and going, that was fun. Right. Because there's just so much like downside to it. There's so much like death and disappointment and frustration. And like a lot of people have really struggled, but there's a lot of pioneers who are like, man, if I'm honest, I actually like really thrived during this season. So to me, that's the story that's not getting out there much. Sure. Because we're hearing like worst thing ever, and yes, but it's also perhaps the best season ever for a lot of leaders. So to be honest, those are a lot of the stories I hear. Yeah. Because I think so many of my friends are pioneers. Like they're like, man, never before have I had more opportunities. Never before have I seen this kind of like growth. And you're also hearing that from a lot of churches. A lot of churches had their best financial year ever in the history of their church. Now, you could argue that a lot of those are larger. A lot of those, they already had mobile or digital giving in place, just around one area, which is finances. Mm-hmm. So many of them, they were already set up for an opportunity for people to continue to give generously to them through means which didn't have to change much, right? Right. But I've heard that story over and over from a lot of churches, which is like 2020 was our best year ever financially. I'm like, wait, really? Like, okay, that we're not hearing that on the on the evening news.
Sure. And I think a lot of it obviously has to do with the community that you're in and how many jobs were affected and, those kind of things. Of course, that all plays in. But that was certainly the case here at Restoration. We ended the year in a really strong financial position. When we started the pandemic, everyone was, we pulled everything back. We pulled back all the reins and said,
Right.
hey, let's be cautious. And then going into 2021, it's like, okay, let's open the floodgates here a little bit and see what we can do. And so that certainly resonates. Let me make it a little bit more personal for you. You're a consultant, author, speaker. You do a lot of different things. How did you survive the pandemic, and how do you feel now about yourself coming out?
I'm actually like, I would say two sides of the same coin. One is that never in the last 25 years did I ever slow down as much as I had to. Meaning taking more time to exercise,
You're a big wilderness guy, right?
Yeah, hunting, fishing. Yeah.
I did see a picture of you on Instagram fishing with AirPods in that everyone was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, wait, is that even legal?
It's like, don't ignore the fish. That's a good looking fish.
Exactly. Yeah. But I was, I was probably listening to a podcast.
I think you said you were listening to worship. I kind of read through some of the comments. You're like, I was listening to some worship and fishing.
Yeah, there you go.
But that's how we fill our buckets, right?
Exactly. So on that side, I felt like I would have the pandemic forced a break for every single person in the world. And me being one of those, and I wouldn't have slowed down,
Sure.
I mean, so that was thank you. I mean, that was life-giving. So, and also now it's that question of, okay, what are the things that happened during the pandemic that we now want to keep in place going forward? And this is true both in your personal life. For me, it's also well, why can't I spend a lot of time hunting and fishing? And, why am I putting those things to the side? Snow skiing, anything outdoors. I need to put those rocks in first.
Yeah. Into
the new, the sort of the new rhythm of schedule. But the other thing is there's also these adaptions and pivots that I've seen a lot, especially a lot of churches do, that now I'm like, wait, guys, don't kill that.
Yeah.
Why are we getting rid of the daily Bible study that was happening at noon, Monday through Friday during the pandemic, that every marketplace leader was like, thank you for finally creating something that I can be part of that allows me to get in the Word in a very appropriate but also convenient way. And a lot of churches are now they're going back to, well, let's just go back to what we were doing before. Right. Sunday's coming. Let's program Sunday. Let's put our energy back into attendance. And I'm kind of waving the flag going, stop. I mean, yes, that's important, but all those things that you started during the pandemic, let's not kill all those. Let's keep 75% of them around because you didn't think they were important as the pastor,
right?
But everybody else in your congregation was finally, you're finally getting the idea of Monday through Friday really does matter.
Yeah, and making content available whenever somebody wants to consume it just feels like the church might then only be a decade behind the rest of the world instead of several decades behind, as sometimes we're accustomed to.
And you can argue, around content, and I get it, but at the same time, discipleship.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's that idea of so many churches were putting discipleship metrics and outlets in place daily, or at least weekly, that look like Tuesday night or Wednesday morning or Wednesday at noon or, the Thursday get together. And so many of those things now, we're all as participants and owners and creators in the house, the local church house, we're all saying, hey, I know we got to get back to Sunday, but let's make sure we don't get rid of the stuff that actually is helping us grow as followers of Jesus. And, it's so easy for any of us, I don't care who you are, to go back, like the idea of let's go back to what it was March of 2020. And we got to be really careful about that.
Well, and I think one of the gifts of all of this is the pruning that happens in churches. That, there's no longer an excuse to say, hey, well, somebody in your church doesn't know how to do a Zoom meeting, or somebody in your church,
right.
Like at this point in time, if you don't know how to get on a YouVersion account and do the Bible reading plan, like it's only because you chose not to do it. Now we've done video. We forced ourselves to do video tutorials and to make house calls. I was pastor / IT for at least a couple of months,
exactly.
And so that's I think that's a really good word. As I look at your kind of body of work, one of the things that I see pretty consistently is you have kind of pivoted at either the right time or you made the time right later. Whether that be Catalyst or some of the work that you do now. I'm always love to ask people, how do you hear from God in those big life-changing moments? Like what are your practices to hear from God?
Man, I feel like I should be asking you that question. Not to volley it back like Serena Williams, hitting it back across the net. But I mean, I know this, like I would say I'm really intentional about listening to other people, and that the wise mentors or sages in my life that have permission to speak truth over me, but also like speak prophetically into me.
Yeah.
I always am giving more permission to them, and I'm actually seeking it out. I'm actually hungry for it in moments of transition.
Yeah.
Almost to the point of being annoying. Like, again, just think of, for me, again, I think of like people who have said things, whether it's pastors or authors or just voices that I have access to. I'm like, listen, this is important to me. This is a season. I need you to actually like seek God on my behalf, please. And you know what's interesting about that I found? It may just be me, but I found that actually is life-giving to those people. To like, they actually, I almost think, I don't want to bother you.
Right.
And they're like, about time you asked.
Well, I mean, it's the Peter Timothy principle, right? Like when we look at Peter's writing, he talks about Timothy and he says, this is my spiritual son in the faith. Everybody wants to tout their spiritual son or daughter, right? Like,
yes.
And it feels like that's exactly what you're saying.
You got it, man. But I mean, part of me, I'm like, you're busy and I know you get thousands of texts. And here's what I find about those kind of people too, is they are busy, but they're really not busy. Like they have margin. The reason they are who they are is because they create margin to respond, so I'm actually giving them the opportunity to lean in and to live out what for many of them is a sense of their calling. So that's I find the most value usually from the people around me speaking truth back into me. I'm definitely like in this season more recently, and this, I think it's just spiritual maturity.
Yeah.
That I'm like praying for much more of what I would say like is supernatural revelation of God. And that's I think that's a discernment gift. I think it's a wisdom gift. And I'm hoping it's true for like me hearing the voice of God.
Yeah.
But I'm finding that actually it's like I'm starting to do what I was doing to those other people. I'm starting to have these moments where I will say to somebody, again, usually younger, hey, listen, I'm sensing that like there's this going on in you. And I think this is something that I need to speak to you. It may be totally off. And what it is I feel like it's God gifting me and the Spirit gifting me with supernatural revelation.
Sure.
And now I'm like, man, I want more of that.
Yeah.
Because when it gets validated, and sometimes I'm totally off. Sometimes it's like, that's goofy, Brad. Like, I don't know what you're saying. But a lot of times it's like, man, you just said something that is life shifting. And the more you get of that, the more you want of that. I found anyway for me. So
no, amen. Listen, I agree completely. I think, well, I mean, you can never have enough of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly.
Why not, the advocate and all the things that, and when you live that, I was reading the other day in Acts, right? And it says spirit enabled, right? And I just want to live a spirit enabled life. And that feels like that is right on target with what you're talking about there. Like, hey, I'm just spirit enabled. I'm just going with it.
Absolutely, man. Well, and that's, again, for anybody who's thinking about like how they approach culture, people in culture who are lost as a goose, they want all of God still.
Yeah.
So, the old days of we sort of show up with this, this JV version of God. I just think people walking in, whether they're walking into your church or not, they are saying, okay, I'm not even sure where to start, but just give it all to me. So that the place where you find exegesis and expression, that's where the hot zones are, I think.
Well, I think, if you couple this with what's happening with the pandemic, what we've got is this kind of God-ordained collision between experiential, Holy Spirit-filled worship and really good opportunities to engage on every other day of the week. And that feels like where the next leg of the church history will be. Hopefully, I mean, that's my prayer. At least I think that's how we get to revival. I think.
I agree, man. I mean, look at what Maverick City Music,
man, and their pop-up worships and all these things. And
yeah, I mean, those cats, I mean, I know some of them, but it really is like just a fresh experience.
Yeah.
And again, it's a mashup. It's unity. It's it feels like it's not anti what it has been. It's not like I'm responding to something that I didn't like, but it's just a fresh expression. And, every generation has a fresh expression. That's why I like when I think of Catalyst or other movements, but I'll just talk about Catalyst, like, the power of 20 years of gathering leaders. Like if Catalyst never gathers, if Catalyst never does another event, it's like, man, that was a great run, guys. That was 20 years of like incredible impact on a generation. And sometimes like we need to let those things stop.
Yeah.
Or die or move on because God uses it for a certain season. And then there's a fresh expression. And so many times, movements, churches, events, you're like, wait, you're still around? and some of us need to fire ourselves, like we don't need to be the 60-year-old still trying to lead the young leader movement. And everybody's looking at us going, seriously, bro, like, I love you, but stop. Enough already. Like that, it's time for a new leader to take the reins and create something different.
Well, and for all of our listeners, if you haven't listened to Brad on Carey Nieuwhof's podcast episode, I think it was 25 or 27. I'll link to it in the show notes. But you tell the story about when you got tapped out of Catalyst, and it is one of those moments in life where it was time, and you knew it was time, and it was still, but that didn't make it any less hard.
No, it was hard, man, and it took an outside force. It took a guy named Steve Cockram, right, to read me the correct mail and be like, bro, you're done. Like, let's kill Callous Brad. It's time to shoot him in the head. We love him, but it's time for a new season.
Yeah, man, that's a really good prayer, I think, for the church and for our friends who are listening, and just like, let's lean into that next season, because it does feel like things are shifting.
Let me just say this.
Yeah.
My story is not everybody's story. Because some people say, well, Brad, does that mean I I can't have a run for 40 years in the same seat? No, it doesn't mean that. But we know, like we're smart. We're common sense. Like we know when we're when everybody around us is like whispering and going, seriously, when is he or she ever going to realize that like it's time? And so what we don't want to do is be the last one, right? We want to Barry Sanders that thing, not Brett Favre it, right?
Oh, that's good. So let me ask you this: you've got this new-ish. I think you're 40 some odd episodes in to this podcast. What's your big vision with this? What do you hope to do with it?
I don't know, man. Listen, I should be asking you that question. Like, give me some advice.
My advice is seek after people you want to talk to.
Well, listen, truly, like that. I just like talking to my friends. Turn on the recorder and let other people listen. But I mean, my big vision, truly, to answer your question, is curation. I mean, the reason I'm doing this podcast, because there's tons of other podcasts. We didn't need another podcast. But I want to curate. So links, recommendations, resources, books to read, podcasts to listen to. If I'm doing that, then I can actually like add value. I think that is helpful. So that's for me, the win is I'm trying to create the podcast that I want to listen to, which is give me a few links that I can like click on and then go read that article. And that's a win.
Yeah, and you do that with your newsletter too, right? Yeah,
exactly.
And what's the best place for our friends who are listening to connect with you online?
Yeah, either h3leadership.com. That's the podcast website, or bradlomenick.com is my website, but it's kind of lame. To be honest, I haven't changed it in years, man. I need to redo. And then same handle on all the social media.
Yeah.
But I don't post a lot, so I do a lot of listening.
That's really good. Okay, last question I always love to ask people. It's an advice question. It's an advice question. You have to go back and give yourself one piece of advice, except I get to pick the time in your life where I get to take you to. So in this particular case, I'm going to take you to the day after you had the conversation with Steve. And so if you could go back and talk to that younger version of yourself, what advice would you say?
Listen, this is a great question. I'm stealing this from you, Tony.
But I do it at the end of every episode. Please do.
Gosh, this is such a good question. So the day after, I'm sitting in my office and I'm like, okay, the tension between, we have an event coming up because that was August of 2013, I think. We have an event coming up in like 60 days, 50 days. And now I'm dealing with the tension of, he just told me that I need to take a sabbatical this fall.
Wow.
And what does that mean? And am I like, have I already made the decision without making the decision that it's time for me to move on? So the tension of like, there's this massive thing coming up. We're planning for the next year, a year out already.
Sure.
So what am I supposed to work on right now? Like, I'm looking at my desk, like which pile do I start to unpack or figure out?
Right.
Compared to like, well, should I start getting some sabbatical books and start booking a trip to London to hang out with Steve and like, so the tension I felt was wow, this is a moment of real lack of clarity. Now, what I would say to that leader is, well, you already knew the answer, Brad. That's what I would say. You already know the answer. You were just waiting on somebody to tap you on the shoulder to give you permission to like feel okay about looking around going, boy, it might be time to transition to something new. So that's the thing that I would tell myself is, you already know it. So let's start putting things in place, which would have meant like literally that day, I probably should have been saying to Tyler Reagan or somebody else on the team, like, all right, guys, come in. Listen, we're transitioning and I've already made the decision. Now we don't need to tell everybody, but let's start putting things in place compared to like, am I still going to be okay? And, well, I'm really needed because I got to make that decision on who's speaking next year. You know what I mean? So I just think when you know, and when you feel that so many of us as highly ambitious leaders, we don't want to be seen as a quitter.
Yeah.
But man, transitions are good. Transitions are healthy. Transitions happen. And if we give ourselves permission to feel freedom in it, it just changes the way we approach it.
Amen.
There you go.
That's a great answer. Brad, thank you so much for being so generous with your time today.
It's a blast.
Connecting. I really enjoyed it. And I really hope to connect again in the future.
Loved it, man. Thanks.
I told you guys what a great conversation with Brad. I'm so thankful for his time, his generosity. Don't forget to check out some of his episodes. Subscribe to the H3 podcast. Let him know that you heard about him here on the Reclamation Podcast. As always, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Maybe share this episode with a friend. And let's continue to stay connected. If you want to follow Jesus, you've got to be willing to move.